Rain hammered against the glass walls of the Hale estate, like 1,000 restless fingers, each drop echoing through the vast mansion that had been transformed into a private ICU. Emily Reyes stood beneath the dim LED lights of the room, her scrubs soaked from the storm she had sprinted through to get here, hair dripping against her neck, as she pushed the sliding door closed behind her. The entire first floor of the billionaire's estate had been rebuilt after the accident to mimic a hospital suite. Machines blinked in quiet rhythm beside a single bed centered beneath a ceiling of recessed lights. Everything looked cold and precise, except for the man lying motionless in the middle of it. Landon Hale, 35, founder of Hale Robotics, a man who once rebuilt half the world's medical systems. Now a silent giant, surrounded by chrome rails and wires. Emily paused at the foot of the bed, breath trembling as she took him in. Even unconscious, he looked almost unreal. Strong shoulders beneath the thin white gown, sharp jaws softened only by stillness, dark stubble tracing a face that once appeared on magazine covers. And yet he had not opened his eyes for 11 months. Emily whispered breathlessly as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "I am here, Mr. Hale. I am starting your care." The storm growled outside. Her hands were freezing. She reached for the basin of warm water, prepared earlier by the rotating staff. Though none of them ever stayed in the room longer than necessary, everyone feared the responsibility of touching a man whose wealth and influence could crush careers. Everyone except her. Emily dipped the towel into the steaming basin and wrung it out. Her fingers shook the warmth soaking into her palms. She stepped toward him and gently unfastened the hospital gown, pushing the fabric aside just enough to reveal the rise of his chest. The LED lights reflected off his skin like a soft glow over marble. She pressed the towel against him. The moment cloth met skin, his body responded. A nearly invisible shift, a faint change in breath. Emily froze. Her pulse kicked. There it was again, that tiny flutter she had felt 3 times in the past month. She whispered, "He reacts when I touch him." She had told the others. They had laughed behind closed doors. Someone had even snapped a picture of her bathing him last week, and the image had circulated among staff. The obsessed nurse. The girl who stayed in that billionaire's room too long. Emily swallowed. She had cried over the humiliation, but still came back every night, because she knew what she felt was real. He felt her. Somehow he did. She dragged the warm towel slowly across his chest, following the slope of his collarbone, her movements steady, but her thoughts racing. Landon's breathing shifted again. She leaned closer. The monitor remained stable, but his chest rose with a deeper pull. Rain thundered harder outside, lightning illuminating the glass walls for a heartbeat. His skin warmed under her touch as if her hand called him from somewhere deep. Emily whispered, "If you can hear me, breathe for me." Her voice cracked. She was not sure why she said it. Maybe exhaustion, maybe hope. Maybe the strange magnetic pull she could not explain. Then Landon inhaled, sharply, as if breaking through a surface he had been drowning beneath. Emily staggered backward. The towel dropped to the polished floor with a wet slap. She pressed a hand over her mouth. That could not be a coincidence. It could not be reflex. Tears burned her eyes as she stepped closer again, heart pounding against her ribs. She reached out with trembling fingers and pressed them gently to the center of his chest to feel the rise and fall. And then something happened she could not have prepared for. His hand moved, not a twitch, not a spasm. His fingers curled with weak intention and closed around her wrist. Emily gasped so violently she nearly cried out. His touch was cold but unmistakably alive. His thumb brushed her skin as if recognizing her. The machines remained steady, the world outside railed with storms, and for one suspended moment, Emily felt like the universe held its breath. Landon Hale had been silent for nearly a year. He had not responded to anyone, but now he was holding her, her wrist captured in his unmoving but conscious grip. Emily whispered into the charged stillness, "Landon, if you can hear me, do it again." A flash of lightning spread across the glass, and in its reflection she saw his chest rise once more, deeper, purposeful. She pressed a shaky palm against her heart as a whisper escaped her lips. "Oh my God, you are trying to come back. And you are coming back to me." Her knees buckled slightly, but she held herself upright, staring at the impossible. The storm raged, the machines hummed, and Landon Hale breathed for her. Emily Reyes had never planned to end up inside a billionaire's estate turned private ICU, yet every decision in her life seemed to tilt her toward this storm-lit room, where a man who had never known her name somehow breathed differently for her. Hours after the moment Landon's fingers had closed around her wrist, she found herself sitting alone in the small staff lounge, tucked behind the main staircase of the estate, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee she would never drink. She stared at her reflection in the microwave door, seeing the exhaustion carved beneath her eyes, the way her dark hair clung in damp waves from the rain, and she wondered how she became the center of a scandal she did not ask for. Just 12 hours earlier, she had been called into the administrative office at Westbridge Home Care Agency, where the director had placed a glossy printed photo on the table. The photo showed her standing over Landon as she bathed him, body angled in a way that made the moment look like something intimate, something secret, something inappropriate. Emily had felt her stomach drop at the sight. She recognized the angle and even the moment. It was the afternoon she had been adjusting his sheets and wiping his torso after a sudden spike in his temperature. She remembered humming under her breath, trying to soothe him. Someone had been standing in the doorway, phone raised. The caption written beneath the image in red marker still haunted her. "She likes him too much." The director had not fired her, but he had sighed heavily, rubbing his temples, as he told her there were complaints from staff and concerns about her emotional involvement. She had tried to defend herself, words trembling, as she explained that Landon responded physically when she touched him, that she had witnessed reactions small but real. The director had stared at her with the sympathetic look people reserve for someone who sounds delusional. He told her she would be reassigned away from the main rotation and placed exclusively at the Hale estate, because the private team insisted on full control. Everyone thought the assignment was punishment, but they did not know the truth. Emily had volunteered for extra shifts at the estate. Long before the rumors, she had been the only one willing to stay past midnight, the only one who refused to treat Landon like a lost case. Now sitting in the lounge, her hands cupped around coffee she could not taste, she wondered if her stubborn devotion had turned into something more than compassion. Why did she run through rainstorms for a man who could not open his eyes? Why did her pulse race every time she stepped into his room? Why did his silent presence feel like gravity itself, like he was pulling her toward some truth she was terrified to face? Emily closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She remembered her father's voice the night before he died. "Do not let the world turn you cold, Emmy. Promise me you will keep caring even when it hurts." Her father had been everything to her, gentle, hard-working, the kind of man who fixed cracked windows and still found time to ask about her homework. But a mistake during his treatment at a crowded county hospital had taken him from her. Ever since that night, she had vowed to care for patients the way no one had cared for him. That vow had carried her through nursing school, through endless night shifts, through moments where she was so exhausted she fell asleep sitting up. But nothing prepared her for Landon Hale. She pushed up from the lounge chair, tossed the coffee, and walked back down the hall into the estate's polished corridor, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the pristine marble. The mansion was quiet, except for distant thunder and the rhythmic hum of machines filtering from Landon's room. As she approached the glass door, she paused, resting her hand on the cool surface. Her heart stuttered. He reacted to her earlier. Not a dream, not a reflex, not imagined. A part of her wanted to run inside and test it again, to place her hand over his chest and whisper the same words to see if he would breathe for her once more. But she was afraid of being wrong, afraid of hoping too much. Emily took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was dark aside from the soft white glow of the monitors. Landon lay exactly where she left him. Eyes closed, lashes, still body unmoving, except for the slow rise of his chest. Yet the air felt different, charged, like his awakening was suspended in the space between them. She approached his bedside slowly, her palms still trembling. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Landon, it is me, Emily." Her fingers hovered above his arm, but she did not touch him. She needed to prove she was still rational enough to work here. But the monitors began to respond anyway. Just the sound of her voice caused his heart rate to shift upward by a fraction. Emily felt her breath catch. Her voice alone reached him. She sank into the chair beside the bed, brushing damp hair behind her ear. "I should not be here," she murmured. "Not like this. Not after everything said about me. They think I am obsessed. They think I am imagining things." Her throat tightened painfully. "Maybe I am. Maybe I want so badly to save someone that I am reading too much into nothing." Landon's fingers twitched beneath the sheets. Emily shot upright. Her breath shook violently as she leaned forward. That was not nothing. She gently placed her hand over his. This time his fingers curled slightly toward hers. A deliberate movement, weak but certain. Emily covered her mouth with her free hand, a quiet sob slipping out. She did not know what force connected her to him, but she felt it as real as the rain pounding against the windows. She stayed like that for a long moment, her hand resting in his, feeling the tremor of life beneath her fingertips. Then the door opened suddenly. Dr. Rowan, the lead physician hired by the Hale family, stepped inside with a clipboard and stern eyes. His tone was cold. "Reyes, we need to talk." Emily stood quickly, withdrawing her hand. "I am on shift," she answered. "I checked on his vitals and everything seems stable." Rowan approached the bed, glancing between Landon's face and the monitor. His voice dropped. "Staff have reported irregularities in your charting. They said you claimed he reacted to touch." Emily held her ground. "He did. I saw it." Rowan's expression hardened. "If you fabricate symptoms again, your license will be reconsidered. We cannot risk emotional interference compromising medical accuracy." Emily's jaw tightened as shame and fury tangled inside her. She wanted to scream that she saw Landon breathe differently for her, that she felt his fingers move, that she was not hallucinating, but instead she swallowed it down and forced her voice steady. "I understand, Doctor." Rowan left as abruptly as he entered. Emily stood frozen until she could breathe again. She slipped into the private washroom attached to the suite, bracing both hands on the marble sink. Her reflection looked small, defeated. A tear slid down her cheek, and she whispered to herself, "I promised Dad I would never walk away, and I will not leave you either, Landon." She wiped her eyes, took a breath, and stepped back into the room. As she approached the bed again, his fingers moved once more, as if he felt her return, as if her presence anchored him to the world. And she knew with absolute certainty that she belonged here, no matter what anyone said. Long before Landon Hale lay unmoving in a bed surrounded by machines and glass walls, before he became a headline or a ghost to the world that once admired him, he had been a boy standing in a hospital hallway, gripping his mother's hand, while alarms screamed and nurses rushed past in a blur. That memory, though, buried under scars and success, lived inside him like a shard of glass that never dissolved. And it was that memory that had built every wall around his heart, long before the accident ever stole his consciousness. Landon Hale grew up in a world where money solved everything except the things that mattered. His father, Victor Hale, built Hale Robotics from a garage dream into a medical empire powered by precision machines, surgical robots, and cutting-edge diagnostic systems. But the man who revolutionized modern healthcare had never saved the one person who needed him most. When Landon was 15, he stood helplessly beside his mother as she suffered a cardiac episode in the lobby of a well-funded hospital that ironically used Hale Robotics equipment. He remembered the clinical cold of the floor, where he knelt beside her, the indifferent chatter of nurses who were understaffed and overwhelmed, the agonizing 7 minutes it took before someone reached them. And he remembered her last breath tremoring beneath his fingers as she whispered for him not to be afraid. He had been afraid anyway. That fear had become the engine driving everything he built. He went to MIT at 16, inherited his father's company at 25, and transformed Hale Robotics into a global giant by 30. He created surgical robots that could operate with less than a millimeter margin of error drones, that delivered medication to underserved communities, and diagnostic AI that outperformed human specialists. The world called him a visionary. Investors called him a machine, employees called him unreachable, and women called him unavailable. But none of them knew the truth. Landon had not built an empire to change the world. He had built it to protect himself from it. The walls around him were not born of arrogance, but of terror, fear of losing someone again, fear of being helpless, fear of loving something fragile and watching it shatter. He lived alone in the Hale estate, a modern glass fortress overlooking Lake Washington, where no one could get close enough to touch him. His relationships were transactional, his conversations clipped, his trust non-existent. He trusted machines more than people, and numbers more than words. When his father died 3 years earlier, Landon inherited not just wealth, but the crushing guilt that perhaps he had become everything his mother wished he would not be. He looked powerful, but lived in emotional ruin. And so he worked, every day without pause, every night without rest, until the night of the accident. Landon had been leaving a fundraising gala where he announced a new program to provide free robotic-assisted surgeries for low-income families. Cameras flashed reporters, shouted questions he answered none. He had smiled only twice that evening, once at a child who hugged him shyly, and again when an elderly woman touched his arm and whispered, "You saved my son." That was enough for him to continue pretending he was not lonely. The rain began halfway through his drive home, drumming steadily against the windshield. His driver had been given the night off, so Landon could leave unnoticed. He hated crowds, hated the spotlight, hated pretending. He accelerated across the bridge, stretching over the dark waters near Mercer Island, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Something felt wrong before he understood why. A metallic rattle beneath his car, a sudden drop in traction. The steering wheel jerking sharply, as if pulled by invisible hands. He pressed the brakes and nothing happened. The pedal sank without resistance. His heart slammed against his ribs. Lightning flashed and illuminated a figure standing on the far shoulder of the bridge, one he could not identify. Then the car skidded, hydroplaning, twisting sideways. Landon's breath froze in his throat just before the metal guardrail slammed through the front bumper, launching the vehicle downward into blackness. The world became water silence, then nothing at all. When he woke again, it was in fragments. Sounds he could not place. Voices far away, pressure on his chest, a sudden heat when someone touched him. Then darkness again, and then her. Not a face at first, only a voice, soft, persistent, warm like sunlight, filtering through a closed window. Sometimes he sensed a hand at his arm, a gentle strength pulling him from a void he did not have the will to escape. He stayed because she was there, whoever she was. Back in the present, the storm continued pounding against the glass of his estate, and Emily's voice still lingered faintly in the air like a melody that refused to fade. She had no idea that deep inside the quiet of his coma, Landon heard her. Not clearly, not entirely, but enough to know she was different from every cold, sterile voice around him. Her touch reached a place in him he had walled off so carefully that even in unconsciousness, his body refused to ignore her. Emily Reyes was not the type of person Landon Hale encountered in his immaculate, polished world. She was gentle without being weak, persistent without being desperate, compassionate without being naive. And while he lay suspended in a place between life and memory, he felt the world shift each time she whispered to him. He did not know her name then, not fully, but he knew the sound of her breath, the rhythm of her voice, the trembling of her hands when they rested against his chest. He knew she cared. A strange warmth moved through him whenever she entered his room. A warmth he recognized from long ago, before fear had replaced the softness in his heart. Before walls became armor, before machines became his only refuge. And so, even while trapped in stillness, Landon clung to the one sensation that felt human. Her touch, her presence, her quiet promise that he was not alone. While Emily struggled outside against critics' rumors and exhausted administrators, Landon lay deep inside his fractured consciousness, drawn to her like gravity itself. On nights when she cried quietly beside him, he felt a tremor beneath the darkness, as though something inside him refused to let her grieve alone. And on the night she whispered, "If you can hear me, breathe for me," he felt the universe pull him upward, as if her voice had found a crack in the walls he thought were unbreakable. It was not logic that made him respond, not medicine, not science. It was recognition. The deepest part of him knew her. knew the kind of soul she carried. And a man who had spent his life building walls felt them begin to crumble for a woman he had never seen awake. And when he finally opened his eyes for her, he would learn that the miracle was not his awakening. It was the fact that he had awakened wanting her. The storm eased by morning, but inside the Hale estate, the air still felt heavy with the echo of the impossible moment that had passed between them the night before. Emily Reyes stood at the edge of Landon's bed with the basin of warm water in her hands, feeling the same tremor of anticipation that had lived beneath her skin ever since his fingers curled weakly around her wrist. She had barely slept, spending most of the night replaying the movement in her mind, the way his chest had risen sharply when she whispered to him the undeniable human reaction that no textbook could explain away. Now, as sunlight filtered through the glass walls, turning the room into a soft haze of gold and white, she wondered if she had imagined it all. But the moment she stepped closer, Landon's monitors shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if his body recognized her presence before she even spoke. Emily set the basin down, her breath catching as she reached for the towel and dipped it into the warm water, watching it steam in the cool air. Every day for weeks she had bathed him the same way, slow, careful movements meant to prevent stiffness and keep circulation flowing. But recently, something had changed, something she could not explain to the skeptical doctors or jealous nurses. Landon answered her touch with a language no one else witnessed. She wrung out the towel and pressed it gently to his shoulder. His breathing deepened, not enough to trigger an alert, but enough for her to feel it beneath her fingers. Emily swallowed a surge of emotion as she slid the towel down his arm, watching the faint rise of goosebumps along his skin, as if reacting to warmth after a long winter. She moved to his other side, lifting his hand to clean it the way she always did. But as she cradled it in her palm, his fingers twitched again, more deliberately this time, a tiny tug toward her touch. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. "Landon, I am here," she whispered softly, her voice cracking. "You can keep fighting. I will not leave you." The monitors pulsed in even rhythm, steady and strong. She began to explore more consciously, curious to understand where his reactions came from. She brushed her fingertips over his knuckles, and the muscles in his forearm tightened ever so slightly. She touched the inside of his wrist, and his pulse surged. When she wiped along the curve of his neck, the faintest tremor rippled through his shoulder. It was subtle but undeniable. Emily felt electricity travel up her arms each time he reacted. It made her chest warm, made her breath unsteady, made her wonder if somewhere in the darkness of his mind, Landon Hale was reaching back for her. She tried to stay professional, reminding herself that she was only observing clinical responses, but her heart refused to obey. "You are trying to come back," she whispered, her hand pausing over his sternum. "I know you are, and I am right here." She pressed the towel gently against his chest, the warmth spreading beneath her palm. For a moment the world grew still, the rhythm of rain fading, the hum of machines falling quiet. Then Landon inhaled deeper, his ribs rising beneath her touch. Emily felt the breath move under her hand, and her own breath hitched. "Every time I touch you, it is like you are answering me," she whispered. "What are you trying to say?" Her voice was soft, fragile, overflowing with emotion. She tried so hard to contain. She leaned closer, her hair brushing his shoulder, as she whispered near his ear. "If you can hear me, if any part of you is fighting to come back, Breathe with me." For a moment, nothing happened. Then as she exhaled slowly, Landon's chest rose in perfect unison with hers. Emily's knees weakened. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the blanket as silent tears fell. "You hear me," she whispered. "You hear me every time." She straightened, taking a shaky breath as she returned to wiping his torso. But not everything about this new connection was beautiful. With each reaction, her fear grew. If anyone found out, she would be accused of imagining symptoms again. Dr. Rowan would threaten her license. The rumors from the staff would spread further. And worse, she feared she was crossing emotional lines she was not supposed to. Emily stepped back from the bed, hugging herself. Her pulse raced with confusion and longing she had never felt for a patient before. What was happening to her? Why did her heart ache this much for a man who had never spoken to her awake? The door opened sharply. She startled, spinning around. Dr. Rowan entered, glancing briefly at her, then at the monitors which had returned to normal. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Everything stable?" he asked sternly. Emily nodded quickly. "Yes, doctor, all normal." Rowan moved to the bedside, ignoring her as he checked Landon's pupils and blood pressure. "I want more conservative charting from you," he said without looking up. "No more subjective notes. Keep it strictly numerical." Emily swallowed her frustration and nodded. "Understood." Rowan left without acknowledging her further, and Emily released a pent-up breath. She stepped into the adjoining bathroom, shutting the door before burying her hands in her hair. The pressure of being doubted constantly wore on her. A sob shook her chest, but she bit down hard on her lip to silence it. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes red, lips trembling. "You cannot fall apart," she whispered. "He needs you strong." She splashed cold water on her face, wiped her cheeks, and stepped back into the room, pulling in a steadying breath. The moment she returned to the bedside, Landon's fingers twitched again, as though sensing her presence. Emily's heart softened. She leaned close, brushing her fingertips along the back of his hand. "I am here," she whispered. "I am not going anywhere." She spent the next hour massaging his arms, his shoulders, the muscles along his back, to keep them from stiffening. She worked slowly, methodically, but her heart thudded wildly every time he answered her touch with a response she could not deny. When she lifted his hand again, his fingers curled slightly around hers. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, the kind that terrified her because it felt so real. "You know me," she whispered. "I do not know how you do, but you do." Outside, the storm quieted, leaving only the soft patter of leftover rain against the glass. Emily set aside the towel, now finished with his bath. She smoothed a fresh blanket over him, her hand lingering on his chest for a heartbeat. As she turned to leave, a faint sound rose behind her. A hitch in breath sharper than before. She spun around, eyes wide. Landon's chest rose deeply, then fell with a tremor that sent shockwaves through her body. Emily hurried to his side, her hands shaking as she reached for him. "Landon, can you hear me?" she breathed. Another breath, deeper, more intentional. Emily pressed trembling fingers to his sternum to feel the motion. His lungs expanded beneath her touch, as if answering her call. She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you were still with me." And as she leaned over him, placing her hand against his heart, Landon Hale breathed again, for her the one person he somehow recognized in a world he had not yet returned to. The night Landon Hale opened his eyes, the storm returned, as if the sky itself sensed something was about to break open inside the glass and steel shell of the Hale estate. Rain lashed against the windows, hard enough to shake the frames. Thunder rolled across Lake Washington, like the growl of some waking beast, and the entire private ICU wing flickered under quick flashes of lightning. Emily Reyes stepped into the room, soaked from her sprint across the terrace. After checking the backup generator, her ponytail dripped down her back, her scrubs clung to her skin, and her breath puffed softly in the cool air. She shut the sliding door and leaned against it for one long, trembling moment, letting her pulse settle. Every instinct told her the night felt different, too charged, too alive. She turned toward the bed, and the moment she stepped closer, the monitors reacted. Pulses shifting beats, deepening, subtle but real. She whispered, "I am back." Landon, her voice thin, from exhaustion and from an ache she did not want to name. She set the basin of freshly warmed water beside him, the steam curling upward like a ghost between them. Emily dipped the towel into the heat, wrung it out, and began the nightly ritual she had done for nearly 3 months. But tonight her hands shook more than usual. Something about the storm outside, the tension in the air. The way Landon's fingers had tightened around her wrist the night before made her feel as if she were standing on the edge of something enormous. She brushed the towel across his shoulder, watching the muscles beneath his skin respond to her touch, the faintest ripple traveling through him. His breath deepened. Emily swallowed. "Landon, if you can hear me, if any part of you is fighting to come back, I am here." She moved the towel down his arm, and his fingers twitched, stretching slightly as though reaching for her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She lifted his hand to clean it, and his thumb brushed her palm with a ghost of intention. Emily covered her mouth with her free hand, tears burning behind her eyes. She forced herself to breathe steady, to stay grounded, to stay professional. Even though her chest felt tight with emotions she had no right to feel. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly, the glass vibrated. Emily jumped the towel, slipping from her grip. She bent to pick it up, and when she straightened, she found herself inches from Landon's face, the soft LED lights casting shadows along the strong line of his jaw. She whispered close to his cheek, "You can fight, Landon. You can come back. I will not let you be alone in the dark." She lifted the towel again, pressing it against his chest where she always ended his bath. The spot she now unconsciously treated like the center of his being. As she pressed the warm cloth over his sternum, a small tremor rippled beneath her hand. Emily froze, staring wide-eyed at the rise of his ribs. Lightning flashed across the glass, illuminating the entire room in blinding white. In that split second, she felt his chest move again, this time more forcefully. Emily's breath stuttered. "Landon." The storm raged harder outside. She leaned closer, her fingers trembling, as she splayed them against the curve of his chest. "Landon, if you hear me, breathe again." His body answered with a slow, deliberate inhale. Emily gasped, her knees nearly giving out. She gripped the edge of the bed for support, her heart a wild, frantic drum. "Do it again," she whispered, barely able to speak. Another inhale, deeper, stronger. Emily pressed her hand to her trembling lips, tears spilling freely. She dropped the towel, letting it fall forgotten to the floor, as she reached both hands toward him, her palms hovering over his face. Like she feared the moment would disappear, if she touched him too soon. "Landon," she choked out. "I am here. Come back to me." As if pulled upward by the gravity of her voice, Landon's eyelashes flickered. Emily's breath caught painfully in her chest. The storm outside roared, drowning out the world. Inside the room, and then amidst the thunder, his eyelids lifted slowly, unevenly, but undeniably awake. For a moment, Emily forgot how to breathe. She had seen photos of him before the accident, the famous profile, the piercing gaze cold and intimidating in business magazines, but nothing prepared her for seeing his eyes open for real. They were a disorienting blue like the lake outside, touched by stormlight searching unfocused, filled with raw confusion and terror. His breath hitched in a rough, broken gasp, as though the act of breathing suddenly hurt. Emily reacted, instantly climbing onto the edge of the bed and gently cupping his face. "Landon, it is okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are safe. You are here." His gaze darted wildly around the room, as if trying to piece together the world he had fallen into. Machines beeped, alarms flickered, and his body jerked in panic. Emily pressed her forehead to his, trying to anchor him. "Breathe with me," she whispered. "Just follow my voice." Slowly, painfully, he began to mirror her breaths, even as tears surged into his eyes from the sensory overload. The storm lights, the sounds, the smell of antiseptic and rain, combined into chaos around him. Emily wrapped an arm behind his shoulders, supporting him as he gasped like a man being dragged from deep water. Then his fingers reached blindly for something, for someone, for her. His hand seized her wrist with surprising strength, almost desperate. Emily froze, her eyes widening as he dragged his gaze to hers, as though recognizing something in her that made the world safer. His voice cracked on a whisper, rough from disuse, the single weakest sound she had ever heard, yet it shattered her completely. "Do not let go, Emily." Emily's throat closed. No one had told him her name. No one had said it in his presence. But he spoke it as though it had lived in him, long before he opened his eyes. "I am not letting go," she whispered, her heartbeat staggering. She positioned herself closer so he could lean into her, his forehead brushing her shoulder, his breathing still sharp and uneven. He clung to her as though she was the only familiar thing in a world that had changed while he slept. She guided his breath with her own, one inhale, one exhale, until his trembling eased. He whispered again, softer this time. "Was it you? Was it your voice I heard in the dark?" Emily swallowed hard, tears dripping onto his skin. "Yes," she whispered, trembling. "I stayed. I always stayed." He tried to lift his head, but his exhaustion was immediate. His body slumped against her, and she held him as carefully as if he were made of glass. She brushed her hand through his hair, soothing him. "You came back," she whispered. "You really came back." His breathing steadied little by little, guided by the warmth of her hands and the certainty of her presence. He whispered one last question before his strength gave out. "Did you know me before this? Did I know you?" Emily pressed her cheek to his temple, her voice barely audible. "Maybe not with your mind," she breathed, "but your heart did." Landon's fingers loosened around her wrist, but even as he drifted into fragile exhaustion, a body remained leaning into her, as if he could not bear to lose contact. Emily held him through the storm, feeling the weight of a miracle unfolding in her arms. And she knew without question that when Landon Hale opened his eyes for the first time in almost a year, he had opened them for her. Landon Hale drifted in and out of consciousness for the next 18 hours, slipping, between fragmented awareness and a fog thick enough to erase everything except the lingering warmth of Emily's hands and the echo of her voice guiding him through the storm. When he finally woke again, sunlight filtered through the glass walls of the Hale estate, scattering soft gold across the room. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, but inside Landon's chest, something remained unsettled. A deep tremor he could not name. He blinked slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dimmed lights, and his breath caught when he realized Emily was sitting beside him, curled in a chair, head resting against the backrest, her dark hair spilling down one shoulder as she slept. Her hand lay on the edge of the mattress, barely an inch from his, as though even in sleep she refused to drift too far. Landon stared at her confusion and something far more vulnerable, tightening in his chest. He did not know her. He could not place her face in any of the broken memories flickering behind his eyes. But she felt familiar in a way nothing else did. He shifted slightly, the movement small but enough to make her stir. Emily blinked awake, her gaze first unfocused, then sharply present as she sat upright. "Landon," she whispered, leaning forward. "You are awake, again." Relief softened her expression. "I was not sure how long you would sleep this time." He swallowed, voice raw. "How long was I gone?" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to overwhelm him with. "Almost a year," she said softly. His eyes widened slightly. A year. Lightning flickered across his mind, a memory of water and weightlessness, and the sensation of falling. He shut his eyes, breath unsteady. "I cannot remember anything. Not fully. Only pieces. Only sounds." Emily reached for his hand before she realized what she was doing, then tried to pull back, but Landon's fingers closed around hers with a faint pleading. "Please," he whispered, "do not pull away." Her pulse stuttered, and she let her hand rest in his. His voice was barely audible as he added, "I remembered your voice." Emily froze. "Mine." He nodded weakly. "When everything was dark, there was a voice calling me, soft, warm. I followed it. It felt like light in a place with none." His gaze met hers with raw confusion. "Was that you?" Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. "Yes," she whispered. "I talk to you every day." His fingers tightened around hers again, weak but deliberate. "Why?" Emily inhaled shakily. "Because you responded to me in ways that others did not. You breathed differently. Your pulse changed. You were never just gone. Not to me." Landon looked at her as if she were the only thing holding him to the world he had awakened into. She had never felt so seen by anyone conscious, much less a man who had only been awake for minutes. A tremor passed through his body, sudden and sharp. His breath-hitched eyes widening in fear as a metallic clang echoed faintly from the hallway. Emily moved instantly, her hands steadying his shoulders. "Landon, listen to me," she murmured. "You are safe. That is just equipment being rolled through." But his body did not calm. His breath grew shallow, his muscles tensed, and his eyes filled with panic that seemed older than the coma. Emily recognized it instantly. PTSD. She lifted his trembling hand and pressed it over her heart. "Feel this," she whispered. "Breathe with me, slowly, just like before." He stared at her chest rising and falling beneath his hand, and slowly mirrored her breath. One inhale, one exhale until his panic eased. His hand remained on her chest longer than necessary, but Emily did not move it. She watched him closely, memorizing the way he clung to her presence, as though it was the only stable thing in a world he no longer recognized. When his breathing steadied, he whispered, I do not know who I was, but I know I trust you." The words hit her like something physical. She swallowed hard, unable to respond immediately. Landon looked away briefly, taking in the room for the first time with clarity. The machines, the glass, the lake, beyond the window, the distant city skyline. "This is my home," he murmured. Emily nodded. "Yes, you have been here since the accident." His brow furrowed. "I remember rain, a bridge, and then nothing." "It is okay," she said softly. "You do not have to remember everything at once." But she knew the memories would return piece by piece, and when they did, they would bring a pain she feared he was not strong enough to face yet. Landon moistened his lips, his voice breaking slightly as he asked, "Did anyone else stay with me? Family, friends?" Emily hesitated. His eyes searched her face, already sensing the truth. "No," she admitted quietly. "They visited in the beginning, but you have been alone for a long time, except for me." A shadow passed through Landon's expression, but instead of despair, he looked at her with something like wonder. "You stayed. All this time." Emily nodded once, unable to speak. Landon lifted her hand, slowly as if testing its weight, and pressed it to his cheek. Her breath caught. His voice turned soft, fragile. "Your voice was the only thing that felt real in the dark. It felt like home." Emily closed her eyes, fighting tears. He was vulnerable, but not in a way that felt unstable or romanticized. It was raw human honesty from a man who had been stripped of everything. She steadied herself and shifted to help him sit upright, adjusting pillows behind his back. He winced as pain flared through stiff muscles. "Easy," she murmured. "Go slow. Your body is relearning everything." He leaned on her, gripping her arm as she guided him carefully. His forehead briefly brushed her shoulder, sending a jolt of heat through her that she desperately tried to ignore. When he finally sat upright, he let out a shaky breath. "I cannot believe I am awake." She smiled softly. "I always believed you would be." He stared at her again, as though she was a mystery he wanted to unravel. "Why does your voice feel like something I cannot lose?" he whispered. Emily felt her heart fracture and bloom at the same time. "Because you held on to it," she answered, "even when you could not hold on to anything else." She moved to check his IV, but he caught her wrist again, gently this time. "Do not go far." She swallowed. "I am not going anywhere." Landon studied her face, the curve of her cheek, the tiredness in her eyes, the softness in her expression. He did not know her, but he knew she mattered, more than he could explain, more than he understood. Emily tried to refocus on her tasks, testing his reflexes, guiding his hands, checking his mobility. Each time she touched him, he reacted subtly, a tightening of fingers, a deeper breath, a softening of tension, as though her presence wove calm into his body. When she stepped away to grab new linens, his breathing grew jagged again. When she returned, it steadied. She noticed. He noticed. Landon whispered, "I think I remember the sound of your footsteps." Emily froze. "You do?" His gaze softened. "I think I followed them out of the dark." She nearly broke. Instead, she managed a trembling smile. "Then keep following them," she whispered. "I will lead you the rest of the way." And as he leaned back into the pillows, eyes drifting closed in fragile peace, Emily realized that no matter how complicated or forbidden or terrifying this connection, she had become the voice he remembered, the anchor he needed, the one person he reached for in the dark. And she knew her heart was in more danger than ever. The Hale estate grew quieter in the days following Landon's awakening. but the silence was not peaceful. It felt charged, stretched thin, like a wire pulled too tight. Landon was growing stronger, his awareness clearing hour by hour, and with each regained breath, he seemed to tether himself deeper to Emily, following the sound of her voice across the room, reaching for her instinctively each time she stepped away. But with his recovery came the ticking weight of questions neither of them had dared to confront. How had the accident really happened? Why did he remember so little? Why did familiar faces visiting him feel like strangers, while Emily, the woman he had never known awake, felt like the only thing he trusted? Emily pushed these thoughts aside as she carried a freshly laundered blanket down the private hallway of the estate. The afternoon sun cut long bright rectangles across the polished floors, and the distant sound of birds reminded her that outside these walls, life was normal, steady, untouched by the chaos that had consumed her world. She paused at the doorway to Landon's room, watching him try to lift a glass of water with trembling hands, his brows drawn in frustration. Without a word, she crossed to him, guiding the glass to his lips. He exhaled a shaky "thank you," and their hands brushed lightly. A spark traveled up her arm so vivid it made her breath falter. She had to force herself to step back, reminding herself that she was supposed to stay professional. But her heart did not listen. She turned away, reaching to adjust the monitor cables when her elbow bumped a small tablet lying partly under the cart. Probably another piece of unused equipment, she thought. She crouched and picked it up, wiping dust from the screen. The device flickered to life, displaying a login screen for the Hale Estate security system. Emily blinked. That was strange. Why would someone leave a logged-in tablet in Landon's recovery suite? Landon watched her from the bed, sensing the tension in her shoulders. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "I am not sure," she murmured, tapping the recent activity tab. The device opened directly into the footage library. She hesitated. It felt wrong to look, but something tugged at her. A memory of the metallic clang that had triggered Landon's panic. A memory of his trembling voice, whispering "someone wanted me gone." Her pulse quickened. She selected the file dated the night of the accident. The thumbnail displayed the Hale Estate garage captured in grainy night vision. Emily swallowed, glancing back at Landon. "Do you want me to play it?" His expression tightened, but he nodded slowly. "Yes." She opened the video. The screen showed the garage dimly lit and quiet. Landon's sleek black electric car sat parked, sensors blinking faintly. A figure appeared at the edge of the frame, moving with eerie calm. The person wore a hoodie head lowered, but their movements were confident, not frantic. They walked straight to the hood of Landon's car, knelt and pulled something metallic from their jacket. Emily leaned closer, squinting. "What are they doing?" Her heart pounded as the figure worked quickly, tampering with something near the front wheel and undercarriage. Landon inhaled sharply. "That is the brake line." Emily's stomach dropped. Her throat tightened as the figure stood, turning just enough for the camera to catch the lower half of their face. The image was blurry, the angle terrible, but something in the jawline, the posture, the controlled motion, sparked an unsettling sense of recognition. She rewound it and zoomed in. Landon leaned forward, straining to focus. "I know that stance," he whispered. But before he could place it, Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I have seen him before," she whispered, trembling. "In the hallway by the garage, when I arrived early last week." Landon's pulse monitor beeped faster. "You saw someone here, Someone who did not work here. Emily nodded slowly, fear crawling across her skin like icy fingers. I thought he was maintenance. He was carrying a tool case. But now Emily swallowed, unable to finish. The truth lodged in her chest like a stone. She turned the tablet toward Landon again. Look! The figure lifted the hood one last time, then walked away with steady, composed strides, disappearing around the corner like someone confident they would not be caught. Landon rubbed his temples, eyes narrowing as if trying to pull memories from the fog. I remember leaving the gala, he whispered. The rain, the bridge. I remember a sound, metal, something breaking. His breath hitched. Someone was there. On the side of the road, watching. Emily felt her blood run cold. Landon looked at her, then fear and realization mixing beneath his gaze. Emily searched the footage again, noticing a blinking icon in the corner of the video. Someone had tampered with the camera timestamps. The footage had been altered, and poorly. That meant someone inside the estate or someone with access to the estate systems had tried to hide the sabotage. Emily's hands trembled as she returned the tablet to the cart. Landon's voice was barely a whisper. Someone tried to kill me, and they might still be close. Emily shivered, glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to appear. We need to tell Dr. Rowan, she said. Landon hesitated, his jaw tightening. No, not yet. Emily blinked, startled. Why not? Because he was the one who insisted I stay here instead of a hospital, Landon murmured. And because he warned you about documenting symptoms you were right about. I do not trust him. The realization hit her like a slap. She had been alone with Dr. Rowan many nights, vulnerable to his scrutiny and dismissive glares. She remembered the way he looked at her as though she was an inconvenience, a risk, a threat. Landon observed her reaction, his brows drawing together. Emily, sit, he said gently. You are shaking. She did not realize until he said it. Her entire body trembled with adrenaline and fear. She sat on the edge of the bed, breath shallow. Landon lifted his hand, slowly wincing with effort, until his fingers touched hers. His voice was soft. Whatever happened that night, he whispered. You are the only reason I am alive to find out. Emily closed her eyes, letting his words settle into the spaces fear created. When she opened them, she saw him watching her with something so steady and warm it made her pulse stutter. Landon squeezed her hand again. But we need to be careful. Whoever tampered with the footage might know you saw this. We cannot trust anyone yet. Emily nodded, swallowing. What do we do? His answer was simple. We find the full truth, together. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest in a place that had been cold for a long time. She nodded, once resolved. I will help you, whatever it takes. She stood and glanced at the tablet again. She replayed the footage, focusing on the final seconds. The figure reached for the tool case and looked up just slightly, giving the camera a clearer angle of their jaw. It was not perfect, but for a brief half-second, the shape of the face, the slope of the cheekbone, the shadow of a familiar smirk flashed in the dim light. Emily's blood turned to ice. She froze, the frame zoomed in, and whispered the name with breathless dread. Cole. Landon's eyes snapped to the screen. His voice cracked. My CFO, my friend, the man I trusted with everything. Emily felt a shiver crawl down her spine. This was not an accident. This was betrayal. And now they both knew. And knowing put them both in danger. Emily hardly slept the night after they discovered the footage. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shadowed figure crouched beside Landon's car. The blurred line of a jaw she now knew belonged to Cole Maddox, the man Landon once trusted more than anyone. The estate felt different now, heavier, like the walls had learned how to listen. Emily moved through the hallways the next morning with her shoulders tight and her senses sharpened, aware of every faint echo, every unexpected footstep. She carried a tray of medications to Landon's room, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in fear, confusion, and the undeniable pull of emotions she had no business feeling for the man she was supposed to care for professionally. When she stepped inside, Landon was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands braced on his knees, eyes distant. Morning sunlight poured through the floor to ceiling windows, casting a pale gold glow across his skin. He looked up immediately when she entered, and something in his expression softened, as if the simple act of seeing her steadied him. "You could not sleep," he murmured. "Neither could I." Emily swallowed and set the tray down. She did not want him to see how badly her hands still trembled. "We should tell the police," she said. "We should tell someone." Landon shook his head slowly. "Not yet." He stood with effort and walked toward the window, each step still careful, though he was stronger now. "If Cole did this and I still cannot understand, why then going public before we have more proof might make him desperate. And desperation is dangerous." Emily hesitated, but deep down she knew he was right. Landon stared out at the lake, the water still and bright in the morning light. "I keep trying to remember," he said quietly. "I keep pushing myself, but all I see is darkness and flashes of pain and the sound of metal snapping." But then he turned, and his gaze locked onto her. "You speak, and something in me recognizes you." Emily felt her heart twist painfully. Landon took a slow step toward her, then another, until he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Tell me something," he said softly. "Why do you stay? Why did you fight so hard for me? Why did you believe I was still here when everyone else gave up?" Emily forced herself to breathe. "Because you responded to me," she whispered. "Because your body answered my touch when nothing else did. Because I could feel you fighting, even if no one else could see it." His expression shifted, softened, in a way that made her chest ache. Emily stepped back instinctively, but he followed her movements slowly, not trapping her, just choosing not to let the distance widen. "May I ask you another question?" he murmured. She nodded once. "Did I know you before?" "In that darkness you were all I heard," he said. "Your voice, your hands, your presence. It felt like someone I had loved before." Emily felt heat rush up her throat, but she shook her head. "No, we did not know each other. Not before the accident." But she hesitated before finishing. "Maybe you recognized kindness, something you had not felt in a long time." Landon stared at her as though trying to memorize every angle of her face. She looked away, pulling the curtains slightly, just to give her hands something to do. "Let's get you ready for your morning routine," she said gently. "Dr. Rowan is expecting to evaluate your mobility progress today." Landon frowned faintly. "I do not want Rowan evaluating anything," he said under his breath. "I want you." Emily tried not to react to that, but her pulse betrayed her. He noticed. She led him through his stretching exercises, adjusting the angle of his shoulders and guiding his steps across the room. Each point of contact was a tiny jolt of electricity. When she steadied his hips, his breath caught. When she touched his wrist, his lashes lowered like he felt something deeper than support. They moved slowly but steadily across the expanse of the room. At one point, Landon tried to take a step on his own and nearly lost his balance. Emily reached forward, grabbing his arm firmly. He landed against her, his chest brushing hers, his breath warm near her ear. His voice was a whisper. "Sorry." She swallowed. "It's fine." She helped him stand upright again. His hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than it should have. When she stepped back, the space between them hummed with something unspoken. Emily cleared her throat. "Let's go outside," she suggested. "Fresh air might help." Landon nodded. They walked slowly down the hallway, Emily at his side, ready to catch him if he faltered. When they stepped into the private garden, the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. A light breeze rippled across the lake. They moved along the stone path, one careful step at a time. Landon watched her more than the scenery, as if the world made sense only when she was in view. After a few minutes, they reached a quiet spot near the water. Landon lowered himself onto a bench and exhaled. Emily stood beside him, staring at the lake. He looked up at her and spoke with a voice that carried both confusion and longing. "It does not make sense," he said. "What does not?" "This. You. The way I feel drawn to you. The way your voice is the only thing that calms the noise in my head. The way my body reacted to you even when I was unconscious." Emily felt her entire body tighten. Landon continued, "I woke up because you called me back." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You cannot say that," she whispered. "You are still recovering. You are vulnerable. No." Landon reached for her hand, not grabbing it, just offering his palm open between them. "This is not confusion. This is clarity." Emily stepped back. "Landon, you cannot. I should not." She pressed a palm to her forehead. "If anyone knew how close we have become, I would lose my license, my career, everything, and you deserve someone whole, someone not drowning in medical bills and student loans and family problems, someone who has not been accused of inappropriate attachment to a patient." Landon stood slowly, despite the effort it took. He moved toward her until he was close enough for her to feel his breath. "Tell me to stop wanting you," he said quietly. "Tell me and I will listen." Emily looked up at him, her heart thundering. The lake shimmered behind him. Sunlight caught along his jaw. His eyes were steady, vulnerable, open in a way she had never seen from any man, especially not a billionaire who once built walls around his life so thick no one could breach them. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her heart was louder than her reason, and her reason was screaming. She turned abruptly, backing away. "I cannot do this," she choked. "Not like this." She spun and nearly ran. Down the path, her footsteps crunching against the gravel. Landon watched her go, feeling something in him fracture. He lowered himself onto the bench again, every muscle trembling, not from physical strain, but from the sudden cold emptiness her absence created. Emily did not stop until she reached the far end of the garden. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to regulate her breathing. Loving him was impossible, forbidden, dangerous. But not loving him was tearing her apart. She closed her eyes, feeling her pulse racing. She had to protect her career, her ethics, her sanity. But in the same breath, she knew she was lying to herself. She was not running from danger. She was running from the truth that Landon Hale, the man who should have been nothing more than a patient, had become the one person she could not unlove. And the universe was not done testing them. Because across the estate, a security alert blinked silently on a monitor, someone accessing restricted footage again, and Cole Maddox's name hovered like a shadow over the estate. Emily did not know it yet, but running from her feelings was the smallest danger she faced. The real threat had only just begun. The storm rolled into Seattle just after dusk, as if the sky itself sensed that something at the Hale estate was reaching a breaking point. Thunder rumbled across the lake, and the glass walls trembled softly with each pulse of distant lightning. Emily moved through the silent hallway with a clipboard against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. She had spent the entire day avoiding the truth. She did not want to face the truth of Landon's feelings and her own, and the truth of what she had seen in the security footage. But the estate felt different now, tense alert, like a giant holding its breath. She paused outside Landon's room, then pushed the door open gently. Landon stood near the window, one hand braced against the glass. As the storm flashed white behind him, his reflection looked fractured, as if he were split between the man he had been and the man fighting to return. When he turned toward her, his eyes softened, but beneath the softness, she sensed something else, something sharper. "You are upset," he said quietly. "I should have been more careful with my words." Emily shook her head. "No, you were being honest. I was the one who panicked." Landon took a step toward her, but she held up a hand, not because she did not want him close, but because she feared she would lose herself if he did. "Something is wrong," she whispered. "I can feel it." Landon's jaw tightened. "I felt it too today. A presence in the house, someone watching." Before she could answer, the lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed, leaving only the emergency strips glowing along the floor. Emily stiffened. "Landon!" "The power rarely goes out," he murmured. "Not here, not ever." A cold shiver crept up Emily's spine. She walked to the wall panel, checking the internal systems. Backup generators engaged, but the private security feed was offline. "That is not normal," she whispered. Landon stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "Cole." Emily swallowed hard, her pulse pounding. "Do you really think he would come here? If he knows you are alive," Landon said, "then he knows everything he planned failed." And people do desperate things when they are close to losing everything. A sound echoed down the hallway, metallic, cold, unmistakable. The sound of a gun chamber being checked. Emily froze. Landon grabbed her wrist, pulling her instinctively behind him, though his legs wobbled slightly with the effort. "Stay behind me," he whispered. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was barely recovered, but the fear in his voice cut through her. Footsteps approached slowly, calmly, as if the intruder had all the time in the world. The door swung open with a force that rattled the glass frame. Cole Maddox stepped into the room, holding a gun low in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Rain dripped from his jacket, the hood casting a shadow across his face, but his smile was unmistakable. "Well, look at this," he drawled. "The miracle man himself, awake, breathing, walking. Very inconvenient for me, Landon." Emily moved instinctively to step in front of Landon, but he tightened his grip on her wrist, pulling her back behind him. "Don't," Cole said, tilting the gun with casual warning. "I'd rather not shoot you first, sweetheart. More witnesses make things messy." Landon's voice was low controlled. "Why, Cole? Why did you do it?" Cole laughed softly, shaking his head. "You really don't remember, do you? Hale Robotics was going to remove me from the board. I was one signature away from losing everything, the company, the money, the influence, and you were going to take it all away with your new transparency policy. But a dead CEO, well, that buys time, sympathy, control. It was almost perfect. Almost." Emily felt bile rise in her throat. You sabotaged his car. You tried to kill him. Cole shrugged. The world will believe anything if you wrap it in tragedy. A storm, bad brakes, a stressed millionaire driving too fast. But you, Emily, you are the one thing I didn't account for. The nurse who couldn't keep her hands to herself. He pointed the gun at her chest. You woke him up. And that broke everything. Landon stepped in front of her, even though she clutched his arm, whispering frantically, "Landon, no, please, no, you are still healing. Stop, don't do this." But he did not move away from her. His voice trembled, but not from fear. "Cole, if you want to end me, then end me," he said. "But leave her out of this. She's the reason I survived." Cole scoffed. "Touching, really? But she's the reason you're standing there breathing, and that means she is part of the problem." Emily felt her heart slam painfully against her ribs. She stepped forward despite Landon's grip, despite her terror. "If you want me, take me," she said. "Leave him." Cole blinked, surprised. "Look at you playing martyr. But don't worry, sweetheart. I only need to deal with one of you, and it won't take long." He raised the gun fully this time, aiming directly at Landon's head. Emily screamed no. She lunged, grabbing Landon's arm, trying to pull him down, but Landon shoved her back with a fierce, desperate strength she had not seen in him before. Cole fired. The sound was deafening. Glass exploded. Emily hit the floor instinctively, covering her head. Landon dropped to his knees, but not from a bullet the shot had missed by inches, shattering the glass wall behind him. Cole cursed, stepping forward to adjust his aim. Emily scrambled up, launching herself at Landon, dragging him behind the bed. She heard Cole's footsteps approaching, slow, methodical. "You cannot hide," he taunted. "Not in your own house." Emily crawled across the floor, reaching blindly for anything, a weapon, something to help. Her fingers brushed a fallen metal IV pole. She grabbed it, bracing herself. Landon whispered Emily no, but she shook her head fiercely. "I am not letting him hurt you." Cole stepped around the bed, gun raised. Her breath froze. His finger tightened on the trigger. A voice shouted, "Drop the weapon. Police." Red and blue lights flashed against the broken glass. Cole spun toward the window, and in that split second, Landon surged forward, grabbing Cole's arm despite his weak legs, despite the pain ripping through him. The gun fired again, hitting the ceiling. Officers stormed in, tackling Cole to the ground, wrestling the weapon away. Emily collapsed against the bed, shaking violently, relief crashing over her like a tidal wave. Landon turned to her, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling. "Emily." She crawled to him, tears streaming down her face. Landon cupped her cheeks, forcing her to look at him. "I was dead," he whispered, voice breaking. "I was gone, and your voice, your touch, your love brought me back." She sobbed, shaking her head. "I tried not to love you. I tried. I failed." Landon pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if anchoring them both to the earth. Their foreheads touched breaths, mingling hearts pounding in sync. Officers took Cole away, shouting instructions, but neither Emily nor Landon heard a word. In the flickering glow of police lights, he kissed her softly, desperately, like a man grateful for a second chance at life and love. And for the first time, Emily stopped running and let herself fall into the truth she could no longer deny. 1 year later, the Hale estate no longer felt like a monument to silence or tragedy, but something warmer, something alive, something reborn. The storm-shattered glass had long been replaced with reinforced panels that reflected the lake like polished silver, and the once sterile recovery suite had been transformed into the Garden of Recovery, a sunlit sanctuary filled with aromatic herbs, soft lighting, and benches built from the reclaimed wood of the old estate docks. Patients with complex needs now arrived from across the country, seeking a type of care that blended state-of-the-art medicine with human connection. A philosophy born from the way Emily had touched Landon's life long before he ever opened his eyes. On an early spring morning, Emily stood near the greenhouse, adjusting the collar of her white dress, the fabric flowing gently in the breeze. Her hair was pinned in a soft twist, and small clusters of jasmine tucked behind her ear filled the air with a sweet fragrance. She looked out over the lawn at rows of wooden chairs arranged facing the water, and her breath caught as she watched people gathering friends, colleagues, families whose lives had intersected with theirs during the long year of healing. She never imagined her life would look like this. Not when she was the nurse, everyone doubted not. When she fought alone to keep a barely breathing billionaire's heart steady, not when she cried in hallways terrified that she had crossed an ethical line by caring too much for a man who could not speak her name. And yet here she was standing in the place where everything changed, wearing the dress Landon insisted would make her look like sunlight. Emily smiled nervously as she smoothed the front of her gown. She felt footsteps approaching, but she did not turn because she already knew the cadence, the gentle unevenness, the quiet confidence that marked Landon's walk ever since he completed his final stage of rehabilitation. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of his presence settle over her. When she finally turned, he stood a few steps away, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that highlighted the strength he had rebuilt over the last year. His eyes were the same striking blue that once opened in terror, the night he woke gasping, gripping her wrist like a lifeline. But now they held calm wonder and the kind of love that did not demand reassurance, because it already belonged wholly to her. Landon stopped in front of her, leaning on the cane he rarely used but kept out of respect for the journey that had reshaped his life. "You look like the reason spring exists," he murmured. Emily laughed softly, heat rising to her cheeks. "You are not supposed to see me yet," she teased. "Tradition, you know." "I have never been good with tradition," he said, "unless it leads me to you." He reached into his jacket and gently placed a warm folded cloth into her hands. She blinked, realizing instantly what it was. The same type of warm towel she had used to wipe his chest the night he first responded to her touch, the night she whispered, "Breathe for me," and he did. "Why are you giving me this?" she whispered, her voice unsteady. Landon stepped closer, his expression tender. "Because this was the moment everything changed," he said. "You thought you were just caring for a patient, but you were calling me back to life. And today I want to honor the woman who saved me long before the world knew I was worth saving." Emily swallowed hard tears forming but refusing to fall. She traced the edge of the cloth, her heart full with memories of quiet nights at his bedside, of fear she tried to hide, of hope she barely allowed herself to feel. Landon lifted her chin gently. "Do you know what the real miracle was that night?" he asked. She shook her head. "You waking up," she whispered. "No," he said, smiling softly. "Waking up to you." She let out a trembling breath, the kind that carried relief and gratitude and love too big to contain. Guests began taking their seats, and soft music drifted across the estate. Landon offered her his arm, and Emily threaded her fingers through his, not caring that tradition dictated they should walk separately toward the ceremony. They had survived too much together to pretend they were anything but a single beginning. As they stepped toward the aisle, sunlight glimmered across the lake, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine and pine. Every step felt like a promise, a remembering of darkness turned into dawn. When they reached the altar, the officiant smiled and began speaking, but Emily hardly heard a word. She saw only Landon, the man who once lived behind steel walls of perfection and power, now standing before her as someone softer, warmer, real. When it was her turn to speak, she took a slow breath, letting her voice carry steady and true. "I thought I was just doing my job," she said. "But the truth is, I was falling in love with a man who could not speak back. And when you opened your eyes, I was terrified, because loving you felt impossible, improper, forbidden. But you taught me that love is not something we choose. It's something we answer." Landon swallowed, his eyes shining, and when it came time for him to speak, he reached for her hands, gripping them with quiet reverence. "I spent my life building walls," he said. "Losing my mother made me believe no one would ever stay. And then the night of the accident, the world went dark. I thought that was the end, but then came your voice, your courage, your hands. You fought for me when I could not fight. You believed in me when I did not exist for anyone else. You are not my miracle because I woke up. You are my miracle because I learned what it means to live." The officiant spoke the final blessing, and when they kissed, the guests erupted in applause. But Emily and Landon barely heard it. Their world had already gone quiet in the most beautiful way. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, the sun dipped lower, painting the garden in gold. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering softly, "So the miracle had a name after all." Landon pressed his lips to her forehead. "It was always you, Emily," he murmured. "Always. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it made you believe, even for a moment, that love can reach through darkness and pull someone back to life, then do not let this be the end of our time together." Stories like Emily and Landon's are more than entertainment. They are reminders. Reminders that every breath matters, that every act of kindness echoes further than we can see, that the right person can change the entire direction of our lives without ever meaning to. And if you felt that truth while listening, if you found yourself rooting for them, crying with them, hoping for them, then you are exactly the kind of soul this channel was made for. So before you go, take just 1 second to tap, like because it tells YouTube that stories about real love still matter. It tells the algorithm that soft hearts are still out there, that people who believe in miracles and healing and second chances are still watching. And if you want more stories that feel like a movie, more love that starts in impossible places, more journeys that twist through danger and heartbreak, and still find the light, then make sure to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter, a new world, a new couple finding their way back to each other. This channel is not just storytelling. It is a community of people who believe in compassion and resilience in romance that grows slowly and honestly in characters who fight their way out of darkness and choose each other again and again. And I want you to be part of that. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me which scene hit you hardest. Was it the moment Emily begged him to breathe? Was it the second Landon whispered her name, even though no one had told him who she was? Was it the confession in the flashing red and blue lights? Or was it the wedding moment when a warm towel became a symbol of everything they had survived together? Your voice matters here. Your feelings, your thoughts, your experiences can inspire. The next story, the next couple, the next miracle. So leave a comment and let your heart speak. And if someone you love needs hope, if someone in your life is fighting their own silent battle or healing from something the world does not see, share this story with them. Let it be a reminder that even in the darkest night, a single voice, a single touch can bring someone home. And finally, thank you for being here, for giving this channel your time, your heart, your attention. Every view, every like, every comment helps us grow, helps us keep creating stories that uplift, heal, and inspire. You are not just an audience. You are part of the reason these stories exist. And I cannot wait to see you in the next one. Until then, remember this simple truth. Miracles do not always look like bright lights or sudden transformations. Sometimes they look like a whisper in the dark, a hand reaching back, a breath shared between two souls who refuse to let go. And sometimes the miracle is you.